What happens when the most outspoken star in Hollywood comes face to face with the most bold and unpredictable personality in daytime television? What they witnessed will go down as something no one in the studio will ever forget before we uncover the altercation that caused producers to jump security to heighten and an audience to fall silent. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think broke Joy Behar, because what went down was like nothing anyone anticipated. The moment those studio lights went on that morning, something felt different about The View. A palpable tension hung in the air as Mark Wahlberg sat calmly poised with a comfortable stillness that exuded the kind of confidence earned over decades. Across from him sat Joy Behar, with that barely perceptible glint in her eye, the one her faithful audience had learned to identify as the preface to a no-holds-barred conversation. While Mark, she began, a calculated grin stretching across her face as she leaned forward slightly. Now that we've established you've signed up for another testosterone-filled role, how do you stand the idea of playing essentially the same guy again and again? Mark didn't move, but a subtle tightening in his jaw didn't escape the watchful eye of the camera. Joy, he responded calmly, if you were to do more than just glance at the headlines, you might catch some more nuance than you're inclined to grant. A ripple of discomfort flowed across the other hosts as the light-hearted conversation they'd expected began to veer wildly off course. Joy wasn't deterred. Darling, I've caught enough, she said, a hint of dismissal in her tone. Let's be honest, your whole career is essentially different shades of the same guy, isn't it? That stoic Boston bad boy, with the hidden tender heart. Different outfits, same performance. The studio audience fell into an almost discomfiting silence. Even Whoopi Goldberg, an awkwardly a strained look of concern in her eyes. I think what Joy is getting at, but before she could complete her thought, Mark smoothly raised a hand. No, he said, evenly cutting through Whoopi's interjection with an undertow of firmness that was as familiar as it was unnerving. Let her continue. I'm eager to hear her critically informed opinion on my filmography. Joy's eyes widened. It wasn't common for guests, particularly Mark Wahlberg, to fire back like this on her stage. You don't have to be a film critic to see a pattern, Mark, she countered, her voice sharpening. For 2 decades you have parlayed that same story about the troubled kid from the block turned successful guy. It's the formula. Mark leaned forward, his gaze intense and direct. The cameras naturally gravitated closer. My formula? He repeated, a cold smile playing on his lips. Speaking of formulas, Joy, let's examine yours. How many years have you been performing the exact same set of jokes as the comedian who thrives by taking down anyone and everyone successful, simply because it's an easier form of validation than celebrating them? The words hung heavy in the air, the silence that followed so profound that you could hear the producers desperately gesturing in the control booth. Joy's face flushed and her voice dropped to an arctic whisper. Excuse me, did you just accuse me of being bitter? On my show? Mark remained unwavering, his eyes steady on hers. I simply stated the facts as I perceive them. Your brand, Joy, is built on the easy win of cheap shots aimed at those who have achieved something you haven't. Can you honestly remember the last time you constructed something instead of tearing down something built by someone else? Sunny had her hand raised, a visible attempt to de-escalate the situation. Maybe we should change the subject. It was too late. Joy stood mirroring Mark's posture. And what have you constructed lately, Mark, besides a series of undimensional characters? I've been in this business longer than you've probably been out of diapers, and my career was built on the back of confronting people with power, not posing for photos and pretending that constitutes depth. Mark slowly pushed himself out of his chair, the height difference amplifying the standoff. Truth? He scoffed, his gaze never faltering. Is this really how you define truth, Joy? Because from where I'm standing, it looks less like truth and more like desperation for relevance disguised as feisty commentary. What followed next would send chills down the spine of every person watching around the globe. Joy's hands were trembling just enough for everyone to notice. Nobody knew if it was purely from anger, adrenaline, or some other unnameable force churning inside her. Surrounding the table, the other hosts sat in stunned silence, unsure if jumping in would smooth things over or pour fuel on the fire. Lost relevance? Joy echoed. Her voice cracked slightly, a nearly imperceptible quiver only those used to the intonations of broadcasting would have noticed. I have been talking on television since you were struggling to get through a sentence without a teleprompter. Do not for a minute lecture me on what's relevant. Mark took a single step forward. It wasn't aggressive in any obvious way, but something in the intensity of his gaze immediately altered the entire atmosphere. Then get on the field and actually play like a broadcaster, he said. Stop seeking applause for facile jabs and engaging in genuine conversations with your guests rather than orchestrating scripted ambushes. Joy fired back immediately. Ambushes? You knew the game when you signed up. If the first signs of pushing back have you so rattled, maybe try action movies where the dialogue is less taxing. It was a low blow. Mark's expression became glacial, the same chillingly controlled look had demonstrated in some of his most effective dramatic portrayals. "Tedious dialogue?" he murmured. "That's quite an observation considering your career has been largely spent standing next to more talented people in comedy hoping no one can tell the difference." Joy's mouth fell open. In over 30 years of broadcasting, she'd never had anyone confront her directly in front of live cameras. The studio fell eerily silent, even the usually vocal audience seeming uncomfortable and fully aware that this had escalated beyond a standard celebrity chat. "How dare you," Joy said through gritted teeth, her composure visibly fracturing. "You come into my home, my show, and treat me like that?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Your show? It's The View, not the Joy Behar Show. Maybe you've been here so long you forgot what it is you do. You make your own guest feel like your adversary." In the control room, chaos erupted. Directors barked orders into their headsets, yelling in hushed but frantic tones about cutting to a commercial break or leaving the cameras live. Those seated around the table sat transfixed like witnesses to an inevitable slow-motion accident. Joy was already pacing around her desk, gesticulating wildly, and her voice escalating to a shriek that had the audio technician frantically adjusting gain settings on his board. "You think you can walk in here and publicly humiliate me? You think because you have some shiny movie awards that give you license to get on your soapbox and personally attack me?" Mark responded immediately, his voice a low rumble of contained anger. "Is this a personal attack? I'm defending myself. I was answering your tirade about my career the second I sat down in that chair with that canned monologue about my history. The difference is, in being honest, you're just deflecting with stale jokes." Joy threw up her hands, shaking her head violently. "Frankly, what you think is of zero consequence to me. You are my guest, you owe me an enormous amount of respect." "Now, if you'll excuse," Mark let out a small humorless laugh. "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn, Joy. And from where I'm standing, you're doing nothing to earn it right now. You're behaving like someone who truly believes they're above the fray." The air in the studio crackled. Security guards on standby began to shift nervously, their hands hovering just inches from where they stood. The audience was silent again, except for the occasional cough and the rustle of fabric as they shifted in their seats. "Beneath the mine?" Joy stopped her pacing and stared Mark down, her eyes burning. "Beneath the mine? Above the fray?" she challenged, her voice still vibrating with fury. "I have been on television since you were doing drugs and going to jail in Boston. I have survived network regime changes, endless co-host musical chairs, and every indignity this business can conjure, and you with your pretty face and the public wanting you and then hating you think you can stand on my stage and tell me how to do my job?" Mark's hardened expression did not waver. "There it is," he finally said. "When the argument falls apart, we revert to the cheap shot personal attacks. We remind everyone about your troubled past, because your current thoughts are just not up for debate. Your past is who you are, Mark." Joy stated flatly. "You can't edit it out just because there are now audiences who like the two-ball, the manufactured version of you better." Mark offered a short nod. "I am not trying to erase who I was," he answered. "I have owned every action and behavior I have ever had, most importantly because I took time to learn and grow. You are still using the same tactics you did a quarter century ago and hoping they work." An audible and awkward silence filled the room, a deafening pause that only someone determined to be the peacemaker could break. And Whoopi was finally standing up and signaling that she was ready to do just that. "No," snapped Joy, cutting Whoopi short before the latter could finish a sentence. She never took her eyes off Mark. "I want to hear about how I'm apparently doing my job the wrong way."
Go ahead. Tell me about how the guy that is most known for playing tough roles suddenly is the subject matter expert of all subjects.
Mark slowly shook his head while wearing a painful grin across his face.
Playing tough? Joy, you've never seen what tough means.
It isn't about sitting behind a desk and making enemies for everybody that walks through that door. Tough is accepting that you're wrong and trying to do better, something that you clearly aren't doing. And yappendetter, something that you clearly aren't doing. All the other people on the panel had become completely still. Sunny had a gaping mouth trying to find the right words. Sarah was in complete shock as disappearing under the table seemed like the safest escape. And yappendetter something. Joy continued with a quiet though imposing voice. "Don't even try me on what better person means. As a matter of fact, I have made a career out of sticking up for those who don't get heard and shouting for all of those that decide to stay silent. Tell me, what is it that you have done that doesn't involve making movies about punching bad guys and proclaiming you are profound every time someone puts a microphone in your face?" Mark stepped up once more, taking time with each movement, and his voice became ever louder. "Proclaiming? I have put my money where my mouth is. I've invested in communities, provided jobs, been involved with children's foundations, and provided opportunities that were just a pipe dream to me growing up. You tell me, what has the great Mark's work provided us other than a reputation for bashing anyone who's trying to do things for the greater good? Joy clapped back. For the greater good? You provide movies, Mark. You're not fighting diseases, you're not making changes to this planet. You're an entertainer who started to be too much believing his hype. The audience was all entranced, some leaning far enough forward that they nearly fell from their chairs, staring intently at the two gladiators as they battered one another with words like sword and dagger in a championship bout. Even the camera crew hadn't let go from what each of their faces were expressing to the growing intensifications between Joy and Mark. Mark let out a mirthless laugh. Bussing my own hype. That's too funny to say that while speaking to the person whose loudest voice has her think she's the smartest one in the room. You don't want a discussion, Joy. You've convinced yourself that your work is so great that people should sit down and obey your commands while you run through your spiel. Joy crossed her arms at the shoulders. Spiel? At least I am organized. At least I'm prepared. At least I'm actually doing my job, unlike the show pony who is coasting through life on charm and hoping it works for him every time. Mark seemed visibly shocked, a blank expression for once replacing his bitter smile. Charm? Do you truly think that is what all of this is about? We are not in Hollywood, it's not about charisma, but respect. And as I can clearly see from the way you treat everybody on the panel, to those in the studio today, you have lost any knowledge of what that single word implies. Your assumption that just because you have occupied this particular seat of honor for more years than the rest of us, that you can behave any way you choose towards them. The breath seemed to be sucked out of Joy's lungs and replaced with the hot blood of rage and resentment. Sore, Benji thought that she wasn't worthy or not, was unprovable yet. As the words spewed forth, everybody was aware that one part of Joy was coming undone. Coming ensues, or I should say that if you act like so-called arrogant former superstar who can't handle people challenging you, you reap what you sow. It was too much for Mark. His face became pale and was replaced with a hot blush. Just for a short second he thought that he would throw a punch in person, but on the contrary, he whispered so quietly he and Joy was the only ones that could hear. Former star? Joy, my career is the height of success currently. More revenue was put into my 3 last ventures alone than your company will make in its better 2 quarters in any business year. Joy pounced on him once more. People's money equal to that of a person's worth. A shame, but of course the all-American Hollywood system's favorite means of currency is that money. Since it's the one that you seem to value, she retorted. Mark was quick to explain that wasn't my intention of saying that. Simply when a person continuously meets and excels all professional obligations with ease, then perhaps there's more than a punch in the movies and that they know a little about getting through to other people, which is a trait that you would never be caught with due to the inflated ego you keep blowing into itself with hot air. Everyone had gone silent once again, and once more all eyes were on Joy's face. All they knew that was different was the expression had to convey a whole new level of conflict. The hint of something breaking in Joy's voice for the very first time was noticeable. You think you can call me a egomaniac? You couldn't handle a simple question about your career without making it deeply personal, you say? Mark shot up instantly. That wasn't simple, Joy. That was a coached insult trying to pass itself off as critique. It's not the same, and your inability to tell the difference speaks volumes, he asserted. Whoopi, trying desperately not to let the entire situation self-destruct as soon as possible, leaned forward. Perhaps we should take a commercial break. No, Joy and Mark said in unison simultaneously. The collision of their voices was under better circumstances a source for much laughter. But right now it felt like it deepened the silence and the tension considerably. Joy wasn't going to let it go. No, I'd like to finish. I'd like America to see who exactly Mark Wahlberg becomes when you try and stop him from getting what he wants. Mark continued to look at Joy for a good long moment as the very slight anger he had been displaying on his face ebbed, replaced by what was an almost entirely new emotion, disappointment perhaps. Joy, he said softly, I don't think anyone's discover what I'm like today. I think they're discovering what you're like. You have become so comfortable with kicking people while they're down that you've somehow forgotten what a real conversation sounds like. You've forgotten to listen somewhere in the mix, haven't you? A bully! Did you just call me a bully? Joy yelled, her voice bouncing off every surface of the studio. Yes, I did, Mark said unflinchingly, his eyes fixed on her. Because that's precisely what it feels like. Oh. You didn't bring me here to be able to have an honest dialogue with, did you? You invited me to be some sort of comedic punching bag, and the second that I refuse to play ball somehow I'm the one with the problem. Well, not today. The studio went into a state of complete dead silence. Nothing was heard from then on out besides the soft humming from the cameras and tiny little whispers heard from the control panel, trying to steer some direction away from this collision. Joy remained perfectly motionless in her seat, staring at Mark in a mixture of disbelief, rage, and something that had seemed almost too personal. She began to speak again very quietly, almost as if to herself, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Mark didn't flinch, not even the slightest. "Actually," he said back, "I think I do. Question is whether you do." The pause stretched even though only mere seconds passed, because no one in the room could predict whether or not the slightest bit of movement in there could end everything. Getty Mupril. The other hosts sat with a disbelieving shock on their face, looking less like TV hosts and more like bystanders to an affair they never thought they'd see. Joy had started to breathe heavily now, her chest heaving, as if she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Finally, she started to speak again. However, her tone was much different, colder, far more deliberate and lower. "Do you know whose problem is Mar? You've become too comfortable with becoming this whole rag storage's cliche that you think it's granted you the right to look down on us. But I see through all of your bulls, thank you very much." Mark's expression became considerably softer, though only momentarily, before it transitioned into something quite unreadable. "A performance? No bullst here. Just what happens when you immediately try and attack the second I have to open my mouth. But since we're talking about bullst, maybe we can talk about your performance." Joy furrowed her brows. "My performance?" Mark said as he nodded. "Oh yeah, my for the other ulson, that Eroshitem. The comedian who always says I stand by my joke at all costs. It's quite a image until a fearless comedian tries and punch down and embarrasses their guest because they want the applause from a laughing audience. Or you just slap on a sarcastic joke over an atrocious joke and tell us it's the truth," he said, and the studio fell back into silence with just the same intensity. The words landed, and in a matter of moments Joy looked as if she was about to explode before she took a large breath and her eyes flew back open, narrowing at Mark. "You call this cruelty? You come onto my damn show and tell me that I'm incapable of doing my job that I've been working decades to hone? Workomachikanese, you call that cruelty?" Mark calmly shook his head once. "No, I'm not calling your career cruel. I'm calling you cruel because of what you do. You've lost the edge, that's what I'm saying. You used to be a witty comedian, people laughed because of that, and now you've somehow managed to equate being witty with being cruel and mean." The remark sat on everyone for a minute, an unbearable amount of time, where literally no one knew who would break the silence. Her hands formed into fists at her sides, and for a brief moment it looked entirely possible Joy was going to completely lose it. "Mean?" she sputtered through gritted teeth, trying desperately to keep her voice from cracking. "Fine. Let's discuss your anger issues. Let's discuss your years of trying to pass off your personal dysfunction as a legitimate career path and miraculously convince yourself that makes you an expert on human beings." Mark didn't even flinch. His face went utterly blank. "My anger issues?" he responded evenly. "Joy, you've been hollering at me for the last 10 minutes. You're turning every sentence into a battle. Before you start diagnosing other people, maybe take 5 minutes to stare at yourself." Joy's index finger shot out in his direction. "Don't you dare tell me to look in the mirror. I know exactly who I am. I am someone who is not afraid to call a fake when I see one, and that Mark is exactly what you are. A phony who's convinced himself that he's changed, but the minute somebody calls him out, the real Mark Wahlberg is about to pour out." Mark didn't budge, didn't waver. "The real Mark Wahlberg? You're looking at him. This is who I am. Someone who isn't going to be run over and ignored because they're sitting at some desk in a studio. Someone who is going to defend himself, rather than just taking it with a smile." Joy let out a bark of a laugh, but there was no humor in it to anyone. It sent a jolt of uneasiness through the room. "Take it?" she said derisively. "You honestly think that was taking it? That's a conversation. That's what happens when people actually bother to ask you real questions, instead of giving you that fluff piece interview about your latest hit." Mark slowly shook his head. "Real questions? Joy, you have not asked me one real question this entire morning. You've given speeches. You've thrown pre-prepared insult after pre-prepared insult at me, and you've tried to make me look bad on national television. The only problem is, I'm not." The simple, confident sentence hit Joy like a physical blow. The color in her cheeks drained for a second, then surged back. "You think I'm supposed to feel ashamed?" she demanded, stepping closer. "You come onto my show, I insult you to your face with the help of my audience, call me names, and you expect me to be embarrassed?" Mark answered her calmly. "Yes. Because everyone tuning in can see perfectly what's happening. They see who initiated this. They see who has escalated it. And they see who is making an effort to act professionally while you have resorted to the behavior of a tantruming child." Joy stared at him, mouths of hers parting and closing without a sound before finally sputtering out, "A child? You called me a child? Get out. Get out of my studio this second." Mark remained perfectly still. "Your studio? I thought we already agreed it wasn't just your show." Joy completely lost it. "Get out!" she screamed, the sound reverberating through the set. "Security. Get this man off of my set now. A gasp went through the audience. Several people instinctively whipped out their phones, disregarding warnings, while the other hosts on set had sunk so low in their seats, they may as well have been in the audience as well. Mark slowly rose to his feet, every motion smooth and unhurried, heightening the contrast between his composed demeanor and Joy's unraveling mind. "I'm not leaving," he stated matter-of-factly. "I accepted your invitation to be interviewed as a guest, and I will remain here until my interview time is concluded." Joy was visibly stunned. "Concluded? You came here to talk about a movie, not to attack me." Mark's gaze remained locked with hers. "Attack you? Joy, for the past half hour I've defended myself against your attacks. You turned what should have been a simple interview into an character assassination attempt, and now you're frustrated because I didn't sit there and take it in silence." She started pacing again, her stride short, agitated, and quick. "Character assassination? You don't even know what character assassination is." She stopped again and pointed her finger right at him. "But you're about to learn." The room went dead silent. Mark's eyes narrowed in his face. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" Joy didn't even hesitate, her voice hard, cold as ice. "No, it's a promise. You thought you could waltz in here, try to make a fool of me in front of the entire world and get off scot-free. You have no idea what you just initiated." After the confrontation was building, the first glimpse of real concern was seen etched across Mark's face. Still, his voice remained unperturbed. "If someone cannot take a challenge," Mark uttered to her, "then maybe he or she is not in the right industry." This comment came as gas into the existing fire burning bright in the studio. Suddenly, Joy ceased her pacing, spun on his axis, and stared back into his eyes. "I am not in the right industry?" Joy exclaimed with surprise. "I am in this industry long before you understood what this industry represents. I've earned my spot, and I've deserved to ask whatever I wanted." Mark asked her nonchalantly, "You deserve to ask anything that comes your mind, but not to demean anyone or abuse that right to be the target, or your anger. This is not how life works and the society function." Joy shot back immediately. "You lecture me on real life? You are living in Hollywood, a fairy tale world, Mark. Don't try to teach me." Mark maintained a straight face. "I am brought up in Boston, and I know how real life looks like. When you speak to anyone like the one you have done for me, you will have to pay for that." Joy felt so agitated that even her words came out with trembling. "Pay? Do you want to know what is the cost? You are not coming back again for this show. Many million have witnessed today for treating and challenging a woman to attack." Mark countered slowly. "Attack? This does not come in account with whether you are a woman or man or any creature you come from, but rather an act where you attack me, and I only responded to myself. Don't fight anyone if you cannot face the challenge thrown by him or her. Instead, don't choose a battlefield as your workplace." Joy cross-folded her hands across the chest. "I can face all sort of battles that you and other casts can produce, Mark, but the actual question is, how you all ready for whatever that's about to happen now?" Mark hesitated for a good few seconds and sighed. "You know, Joy, I pity you. I really do, for this is not how the original Joy Behar, the one who had entertained America years back, once she was." She looked like she was too consumed in anger or frustration. "However, that anger, that resentment is not something that you did, that thing you gave birth to." This statement impacted on Joy like heavy stones, and her complexion became pale, a spark of vulnerability on her face, before the extreme wrath was brought back again with more intense force. "I will rip you into pieces if you dare to tell me that," Joy said almost with a whisper. "You do not know how I am, achieved this, where I've come from, and what I have sacrificed. You have absolutely no rights to dictate whether who I was or who am I today." Mark's reply was as calm and smooth as it could be. "You are right, Joy, I do not know you individually. America has watched your shows for years, and they only can testify if my description holds any meaning at all for them." Joy stood rooted to her spot, completely silent, without any movement of any body part, as though some kind of shock absorbed her entirely. There was an absolute serene quiet all around for almost a minute before she made some sort of action that no one was expecting. With great speed, she reached up, pulled off her microphone, and tossed on the floor. The sound was so deafening in the studios as Im Dunn uttered with the chillingest manner, "I am done speaking, I am done sitting with this particular guest. I am done with this show too." She turned from facing her co-actors and guest and calmly walked out the set. The camera never stopped. The atmosphere became utterly solemn as nobody in the entire studio knew how to respond back and who should initiate the further discussion. Eventually, Mark tilted his head back in awe before looking towards the camera. "Well," he casually asked, "guess that's one way to end an interview." A spellbinding calm hung over the studio floor for a good amount of time, and definitely marked a television moment people will cherish/despise for a long time. Your perspective? Do you think Joy did the wrong thing, or Mark just responded back at her abusive attitude and behavior? Your views, please. Comment below, subscribe for further similar interesting updates. I want your take. The actual decisive moment that proved too much for Joy to take and to snap and leave?